a quick check to make sure that we are in fact streaming. And hello, Facebook. Hello, YouTube. It's good to be with you again. It's Thursday. It's not 2 o'clock, but it is Thursday afternoon here on Eastern Time. We're joined by a fabulous guest from halfway across the world today. And so we're very grateful and honored to be in morning time and afternoon time with you. A few comfort notes as always before we officially get started in a few minutes. I'll repeat this again. This session and all of our sessions are being recorded. If you'd ever like to look at our archive, you can find that at Remake Learning's YouTube channel at Remake Learning. You can use Twitter and Facebook to comment and ask questions, and we'll be answering as time allows. We've loved your questions every week since May 28th, and we hope that you keep them coming. This is also an opportunity to stretch, get some water, get some tea, get some coffee, and scroll over to remakelearning.org/join to review the network norms and values. We won't be going through them here point by point today. And so we'll just give everyone a few more minutes to hop on the stream before we get started. Checking in once again, we'll be getting started in about a minute. You can check out the comfort notes on your screen. Remember that for many of us tuning in live right now on Eastern Time, it's 4 p.m. You've probably been on Zoom and in front of your computer all day, chasing children, playing with puppies, just trying to get by in these crazy times. I highly encourage you to stand up and put your arms above your head and take a deep breath. And then if your body is able, bend over and give yourself a stretch the other way around. If you haven't in the last hour, grab some water. And with that, it is my absolute joy to open this session. Welcome to tomorrow, another Thursday installment of our conversations from May through October of 2020. I'm joined this week with my very wonderful, special, amazing, knowledgeable co-host, Jason Swanson and KnowledgeWorks. They've been a deep partner of the Tomorrow campaign, really helping us shape and forge our future as we navigate a time of tremendous uncertainty. For those unfamiliar with our work, Remake Learning is a network that ignites engaging, relevant, and equitable learning practices in support of young people navigating rapid social and technological change. We've been doing this work since 2007 and are excited to embark on the next 10 years of change alongside you. As we move forward, we're recommitting to justice, new methods, and deeper relationships as we navigate the remainder of our twin pandemics and moving into a post-pandemic future together. Tomorrow is asking us all to question what tomorrow will bring, what young people may need, and how they can flourish in unknown futures, how we prepare children and youth based on what is timeless and around the teachings of Fred Rogers. And finally, what we can do today to make tomorrow a more promising place for all learners. We hope you'll join us now through October for more storytelling, grant announcements, events in October, and weekly conversations, professional learning opportunities every Tuesday with the Transform Ed as we explore the futures grounded in the timeless sensibilities of Fred Rogers. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. That's our info@ account if you ever want to learn more. And join the conversation using #RemakeTomorrow. Without further ado, I'm going to stop my screen share and welcome the person you are all here to hear from today, Cheryl. Welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to join you.
It's lovely to have you with us. As always, I love to allow our guests to introduce themselves to the Remake Learning audience. And so tell us a little bit about yourself, Cheryl. What brings you to tomorrow?
Kia ora koutou, ko Cheryl Doig tōku ingoa no Waitaha ahau, no Aotearoa ahau. My name's Cheryl. I live in Christchurch, which is a small city in New Zealand. And what brings me to tomorrow is my passion for exploring possible futures and just working towards the futures that I want to influence. And I'm really excited by the possibilities, even in these turbulent times. So as a background, I was a teacher and a school principal, and then 13 years ago, gave up my nice safe position and started my own business called Think Beyond, and I work in the area of systems change, futures thinking, strategic foresight, involved in lots of cool projects, but also decided to move out of principalship because we say that our young people will have all these different jobs, but sometimes we need to put our money where our mouth is. So that's what I did.
Well, you're in good company here. Thank you for joining us. And Jason, I know that you and Cheryl have had the opportunity to work together over the past, how long has it been? 3 years?
Oh, wow. So we probably first met close to 5 or 6 years ago in Atlanta, Georgia, and stayed in contact. I've had the honor of going to New Zealand and Christchurch and working side by side with Cheryl. And she and her group of colleagues down there, the futurists and change agents, are folks I hold very close to my heart as both allies in the work and thought partners, and very, very excited for this conversation today.
Likewise.
So I think we should just jump into it. When we were initially thinking about these tomorrow conversations, we had a desire to find perspectives, international perspectives, people that were sort of really change agents, creating the futures of learning, right? And Cheryl, you were one of the first people I thought of. I was like, we've got to get her on. So now that we have you, we are experiencing really interesting times right now. Times just fraught with uncertainty, filled with just deep disruption. And really this idea of disruption is unfortunately not new for your learning community. Reflecting on the work that has taken place since the earthquakes, the work that's taking place now because of the twin pandemics. And so thinking about where we're at in kind of our first brush with deep disruption in our lifetimes and the work that's already taken place, I'm really curious to get a sense of just broadly how you are kind of conceptualizing the future of learning. And then more specifically, what have you put in place? I know that, as I started this conversation, I said, I see you as a change agent. So you're a thinker and a doer. So, what has transpired since those first initial disruptions in terms of creating the future of learning in Christchurch?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So just to put that in context, in 2010, 2011, we had major earthquakes, and in 2011, we had earthquakes that destroyed a lot of our city and a lot of our schools. And so we have been in disruptive times since then, through fires on our Port Hills and then through the mosque shooting 2 years ago, which was again a time of real disruption. And so for a small city of about 400,000 people, we're used to falling back and having to rebuild. And I guess during that time of rebuilding our schools and our whole education system, we've learnt that you take a step forward and then 2 steps back, and the future of learning almost isn't a thing. It's a moment in time, and then it's gone, and we move on to something else. In our schools, some schools had to be rebuilt, some joined. For some time, schools were co-sharing, so a high school might be in operation in the morning, and in the afternoon another school would bus to that site and have their learning. So what we've learnt is the importance of noticing and of being prepared to change at short notice, and that's not typically something that education has done very well. So we're now faced with a global pandemic, and there's not a country that hasn't been affected, all in different ways. Our young people, our businesses are all in a state of agitation, and in times like these, they are uncertain, and we can't change that, but we can provide as much safety and support for the well-being of people, and that's a critical piece of work for this time.
That's interesting. And so, I think all three of us are very familiar with the kind of the iterative process of change making, right? 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Sort of the resiliency of this massively complex system we call public education. So a question for both of you, right? Because Ani, I reflecting on Remake's history, a lot of how Remake has grown and has taken hold happened during, a massive financial disruption. And we could really start to see the network being reconfigured now to meet the needs of the community. So as we look at, at disruption, this idea of 1 step forward, 1 step back, I'm curious to hear both of you, your opinions on this, and that, are we really looking at a transformative event right now, right? If we look at the histories of each one of our networks, or, is that specter, that looming specter of systemic or system snapback real as well? So I'm just curious to get both your viewpoints on this.
Well, it's funny you should mention the system snapback, because I support a group called Futures 101, which is people learning about strategic foresight, and we were online last night, and exactly that phrase came up, and the concern about whether we truly will transform or whether we'll slip back, because that's a place of safety. And in some respects, I think it's and both. And so there are people that just want things to go back, and I always say there is no new normal. Normal is not a thing anymore. So those that want to transform need to keep designing the future and putting their ideas out there so that the momentum continues.
And interestingly enough, Jason, there's a blog that you turned me on to, Eon, excuse me. And I was reading an article on this platform yesterday that was really thinking about the extinction of the dinosaurs, and how once that meteor hit Earth, there was this massive 30,000 to million year period of stasis. And then once creatures started to emerge from that chaos and that catastrophe, the Earth started to see biodiversity and complexity in a way that up until that point had never been dreamed of, and arguably it hasn't happened since. And there's a layer of clay throughout the Earth that is evidence of this massive and wild disruption. The article goes on to talk about, that's interesting, but what might be more interesting is to really see what happens in epochs of stability. and that we focus so much on the chaos that we forget about really investing and looking and thinking deeply about what happens during stable times. And so, yes, this is certainly a moment where people's eyes are opening, and I would hope that the focus at least illuminates what activists and educators have been, and artists have been saying for centuries, that reparations have to be made for Indigenous peoples and Black and Brown peoples and on our soil. But ultimately, I think about epics of stability, and that these are not new pain points and these are not new conversations. And I know that there's a great call for hopefulness in this moment. But I also have seen the equity gaps of our schools and our systems to support parents and families and children in this moment. And it doesn't frankly leave me very hopeful, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't agree with that, Annie. I go up and down in my thinking. Sometimes I'm hopeful and sometimes I'm despairing. And I think at these times it's really important that we take small chunks and allow ourselves time to just breathe and remove ourselves from the conversation and come back when we're ready. In Christchurch, we have a group called Tokono Te Raki, which is the Māori Futures Collective, and they've been doing some really interesting work on the issue of equity, and in particular of Māori equity. And what I love about their work is they've done the research and looked at the upstream factors and the conversation needing to be in that direction rather than in the downstream effects. Because I think globally the movement is to hear the voices that typically haven't been heard, and in particular in New Zealand, our Māori community, our Indigenous people play a critical role in our country. And so some of the work that I've been involved with is even just creating a short scenario about digital equity, because when our schools close down, as in yours, it scratches the surface, and what you see underneath is the yawning gap between those that have access to technologies and learning and those that don't. And so by putting out there just a short example of what digital equities could look like in 2025 and then back mapping that, it's just a way of throwing an idea out there to keep sowing the seeds of positive change in the community. And I think that's important that we all do. So they've got some amazing resources on Tokono Te Raki, the Māori Futures Collective, and Eru Tarina is in that future space doing great work, as Jason knows.
And yeah. I love hearing you say that, Cheryl, because one of the heartbeats or things that I tune my attention to are people who talk about the future for who, innovation for who, right? Who's dreaming and who gets to live and be in that future. And the point for me is very felt in this moment, because there is a tremendous opportunity for change right now. This could be a watershed moment. But again, the communities in which I see those changes maybe taking hold are no different than the changes that Robinson's curve of change and adoption. It's always the same. It's always the same people, right? And I just wonder should we be rethinking that curve is something that I always ask people. I think definitely. I see Jason's face.
For sure, right? And for a multitude of reasons, but really there's just the moral imperative, full stop. You don't need to go any further than that, right? It's just the just and right thing to do, right? Save all the other reasons, right? But so let's pick away at this a little bit, right? Because one of the things that's given me great hope, and we've talked about it, I think, once a week, right, is how fast. So one, taking a step back, right, is the idea that these have been lasting, wicked, sticky problems that, systems reform has shown no hope of curing, right? COVID comes around, it makes the world slow down a little bit, and it makes the world become way more transparent in ways that we're not used to and make us uncomfortable. Compound that with the murder of George Floyd in the US, and very quickly we see an acceleration of sort of that societal layer, where we went from going, yeah, racist system, to definitely racist, to beyond that, it's designed this way, and thinking about the role of like white supremacist culture and organizing. When we look at organizational culture, we've seen a lot of organizations, including mine, starting to think about not only equity in learning, but also justice, and really trying to do that work around what's it mean to make space and be an anti-racist organization. So those things give me a lot of hope, because a lot of times we don't see that acceleration of issues at that social level the way we've seen. Now it's got to keep up. It's up to the dominant culture to do the work, right? And to make room and to make these changes stick. So, I'm curious to hear, Cheryl, like your perspective, right, on equity and justice in learning. And certainly the Maori Futures Collective is a strong example. I'm also thinking of like the Grow Waitaha movement. And what lessons we might learn from New Zealand in this. And then, Ani, what positive conversations have you heard around this? Recognizing that, that innovation curve, it has been patently unfair, right? And that the winners tend to adopt winning strategies and innovations, and we leave a lot of people out in the cold.
Yeah, I think the equity has increasingly been a concern and a major focus for me. And you mentioned Jason, the Grow Waitaha program, and that started as a result of post-earthquake Christchurch, where schools were being rebuilt. But you can rebuild a physical space, and that doesn't change what happens inside. And so the Ministry of Education funded a program that became Grow Waitaha. Waitaha means Canterbury. And so it's a program that supports schools to undertake the changes during the rebuild, right from the design of the buildings through to them moving into their new spaces, which typically are being built in more flexible learning spaces than they were previously. And what I think is really interesting in this space is that the Ministry of Education worked right from the beginning with Mataraka Maha Nui, which is I guess an education council of our iwi, our local Māori tribe, Ngāi Tahu. And so what they did from the beginning was to partner, not bring in the Indigenous people later on and say, what do you think? So we've got a long way to go. And in New Zealand, we've got a Treaty of Waitangi that underpins us as a country and our relationship between Māori and the Crown. And so we're on a journey, which is a journey because all of the Floyd matters and so on in the States, that reverberated to New Zealand and of course around the world. And we've got huge things that we need to do in the equity space. But what I do know is that we're on the journey. Even in the work that we do with Grow Waitaha, there is nothing about us without us. When we're designing work, we do it with Māori as partners from the beginning. And even in the builds of our schools would typically have a cultural narrative that is grown and developed by the local iwi or tribe for that particular school and a Māori name. And that journey is a really important part of acknowledging the past and the partnership of our work. We still have huge gaps, but the Grow Waitaha program is certainly, from a ministry point of view, a really open opportunity to make changes in our city.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's incredible. And for us, bias is the only way often. And Jason, your question to me was, what have I seen as that holds promise?
Yeah. So, and I think another way to delve into that would be kind of the for us by us idea, right? Is, innovating in those very communities that have been marginalized, and thinking of, certainly Temple's work in equity, X Innovation, the Black Homeschooling Network, things like that.
You just said my cue, Jason. You just took the words right out of my mouth. But the Black Homeschooling Society in particular is something that is near and dear to my heart, because it holds the promise of connected learning, of anywhere, anytime learning, of liberatory learning, of Black-centered learning, and it's led by mothers and caregivers. And learning is taking place in the home, and learning is taking place in the playground and in the library and in the public business that might be around the corner. And that has been, at least for me in my own work as social science, cultural change maker, that's always been my destiny. That's the dream, right? That's what a lot of the promises around artificial intelligence say that we might have, that we could have if we did it correctly. It's part of the promise of credentialing in a whole new way, of valuing knowledge that people actually value, that is divorced from the state and assimilation. And it truly holds the promise of skill building in this new and profound way, which literacy and numeracy come along for the ride when you let them, right? The questions that I ask outside of that is, how might we then create accountability and safety and equity, knowing that those systems take so much more community care, right? Mm-hmm. And what value community care and value the assets of a community.
Yeah, and from a policy standpoint, co-creating those accountability measures to really infuse true justice throughout it. It's one thing to be accountable, but to what end and to whom? So it's really interesting, very close parallels between what you mentioned, the Waitaha movement, where at its core, it really is, it's truly nothing about us without us, right? For us, and I'll just speak to my team, the Foresight team, even thinking through, how do we conceptualize and define expertise, right? So who is an expert and who is a researcher in this world? How can we begin to kind of co-design things and really infuse a level of like participatory foresight into what we're doing in a way that we've never really been able to, or like conceived as being possible? Because I think that, in this moment in time, not only, is navigating complexity and uncertainty really important, but it's kind of creating, massive participation around coming to a vision, right? Like what wins and all this hard work, it's probably not to return back to the status quo, right? We're not going to work our butts off to go back to normal, nor should we. So, again, like all of these things give me great hope. I am a massive optimist. So, truth be told, that's kind of where I rest with all of this.
One of us has to be Jason. It's also, I said one of us has to be radically optimistic. Yeah. And it's also a perfect opportunity, although I want to stop talking and hear Cheryl, please, but shifting power, right? That's exactly what shifting power is all about, is about how do we renegotiate the power relationship between research and educators? And we mean educator very broadly here. And what does it mean for the educator's values and knowledge to be the center line of inquiry? And if we could unlock that, what would it mean for a student's line of inquiry to be the center of their knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really interesting space, because what is an educator? If we look at parents as first teachers, and the role of family, what we call whānau, and intergenerations, and just reflecting reflecting on Arnie, your comments about micro credentials and micro learning, and who holds the power, and whether it comes up through the traditional methodologies, or whether it comes from community because of a need and a connection, and how those work together is something we've been talking about here in Christchurch as well.
So let's talk about community and the role of community a little bit, because Cheryl, you all have been working really diligently around a Cities of Learning effort in Christchurch, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, Jason, you had quite a role in that, because we run a conference called Future of Learning. We've had the last 2 years, not this year. And at that first conference, we explored some different ways of creating learning ecosystems, and Jason was able to bring in some different projects and show us possibilities. But and so we have a project called Learning City Christchurch, Ako Otatahi, and it's a learning city approach that tries to connect people from all different aspects of learning. And part of that was the frustration with people saying, I'm education, or I'm research, or I'm business, and not necessarily understanding that everything is connected. And if we are to really explore the future of learning, we need to do that collectively and beyond silos. So Learning City Christchurch, Ako Otatahi, is our small project. It's been going for a couple of years, and our focuses are access, equity, and innovation. And really, like you, but on a much smaller scale, we are interested in making connections. And sometimes it's just as simple as saying, you know what, you need to talk to this person because you've got such a lot in common. And rather than duplicating and creating more noise, let's work together. And so we're just a small project. I don't know if this is a saying in America, but we work on the smell of an oily rag. In other words, there's no money in it. It's just a little it's a small project, but. And so we've been exploring opportunities for spin-off groups. So one group has spun off in the micro-credential space. We've been talking about digital equity, and our learning days are very much built upon the work of Remake Learning. So there were a number of projects when we were setting up that we explored, but Remake Learning is probably the one that resonates so well with us, and the Remake Learning team have been amazing at sharing their resources and ideas. So we've got learning days from the 12th to the 18th of October. Was going to be in May to fit in with yours as well, but like you, we've pivoted to being something much smaller, but our focus will be on, as much as possible, trying to build intergenerational conversations and local events rather than large events, because like you, Arnie, the learning happens in the families and in the communities, and that's where the celebration should happen. So yeah, we're really excited to be working in that space, and it's small steps.
I mean, that's just the I am a reflection of yourself, right? Like that reflection back is so inspiring to me that it buoys me up, and to say, oh, all right, that's people understand this work, and it can be stewarded and carried in this interconnected way that we could only dream possible up until moments like this and conversations like this. So thank you for those kind words, but really it's you doing that work with your oily rag and the fumes. And thinking about something like Remake Learning Days in a pandemic context, and even in a post-pandemic context, it's opened the door for me, at least, to think, and Dory and Yuling, if you're listening, I hope you forgive me for sharing this publicly in this moment, but what does it look like if a parent hosts a Remake Learning Days event? What does it look like for the world's largest open house for innovative learning to literally be an open house, right? And explore learning environments in the home. And I know, Jason, you and I for months now have been talking about how parents have been not only seeing what it is that their children are taught on the day-to-day and how eye-opening that may be for many parents, but also to explore new kinds of teaching and learning practices in the home context, and saying, like, this zine that you and I love so much and share, that's actually what is valuable for us to explore. That's how we want to cultivate our literacies and those alternative methodologies of teaching and learning practice.
Which creates a really interesting, like, I hate to say it, but research question, right? Is that there is going to be so much rich under the hood innovation going on that wouldn't be captured as part of like a formal research program, right? Thinking about the strategies that parents are employing, intergenerational strategies around how do we measure and cultivate something like student engagement that we may never find in a journal, right? But we've got to blow the doors wide open for parents to share out and to connect. So Dory and Yuling, we need to talk about that. Cheryl, the intergenerational aspect of what you're focusing on is such rich territory. I'm really excited to hear how that bears fruit and where that's going. And as we talk about participatory futures and the need to include more voices, I mean, you're right in the middle of all of that. So just thank you for the awesome work that you're doing.
I think too, I come from a what we call a Pākehā background, so New Zealand European, and it tends to be a very individualistic culture. The Maori culture is much more collective, and so whānau and connection to the land and family is woven into this work, and so it must be connected. The family is an integral part of the learning, and your place is as part of the family. So I just don't see it as an option, especially if we are truly honouring our bicultural country. So we, from a treaty perspective, bicultural comes first, and the connection between us and Maori. And if we do that job well, then multicultural will naturally follow. So it's an interesting space, but each community is so different, and I think that intergenerational in terms of pandemic. When we were locked down, I was lucky. I live at home with my husband, and we've got space, and we get on pretty well. It's looked different for people in different situations, and so coming back to that whole equity issue of who's connected and how learning happens, and how schools are modifying their practice to come up with those really amazing ideas or not, or whether they're saying, well, we just can't do this because the young people aren't at school and so learning can't happen, and others that are doing some pretty amazing things and realizing that some children who didn't thrive at school have really thrived when they're working at home, and others really haven't thrived at all, and so I think it also highlights the unique individual personalized nature of learning, and there isn't a one size fits all.
So I want to go back a few minutes. So thank you for giving us some more information around the Christchurch Cities of Learning. But I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the Future of Learning conference, because the origin story of that conference is intensely interesting, and I think instructive for a lot of folks, especially in this period of time. So would you mind sharing a little bit about its creation and the aims for the conference?
Sure. So we ran a Future of Learning conference for the last 2 years, and we've decided not to host it this year because we didn't think online was the way we wanted to head. But a few years ago, myself and Hamish Duff, who co-founded and partners for the Future of Learning, we actually met at a Singularity University conference here in Christchurch that was hosted. We didn't know each other, but we got talking at the conference, and his daughter had been on a program that I had run some time in the past, and we met for a coffee a few times, and we were talking about the frustration with the pace of change in the schooling and the education system. And we'd meet and we'd talk about exponential technologies and people not really understanding that work and how critical that was to the future of learning. And so from that emerged the idea that we'd run a conference. And so we put together the ideas, and Jason's wife, Louisa, is the consummate organizer. And so she was the one that was roped in to do the conference organizing. But for us, the whole focus was at that stage on the transformational technologies, but the not on the technologies and all of the bringing in lots of providers to show what they're doing, which are often at a surface level, but to dig deeply into what community is doing in the learning space, not just in the school space. So our conference typically hosts 200 people, really diverse backgrounds. So the aim is not to have just schools in the room, it's businesses, it's community groups, because the diversity of the conversation really matters, which is why we needed it to be face-to-face. And a mix of local and national speakers, but really to try and continue the conversations about where learning could head from a whole range of different perspectives, but really focused on the learning aspects of a business and a connection and moving out of silos. And we've been lucky enough the last 2 years to have Jason as part of the team, and he keeps bringing other colleagues with him, so that's good too.
You know, we were lucky enough to go back with the whole Pittsburgh delegation. So thank you for the opportunity. And what I love about that story is that question we always kind of ask ourselves of like, somebody should do something about this, right? And the fact that you all were like, that somebody is us and let's just do it. And I think that there's a lot, you know, that's really instructive for our current moment in time when nothing feels like it makes sense, right? Is that this is the time to exercise your agency when you're going like, somebody maybe should do something about all this craziness. That somebody is probably you. You should go for it, right? And that through line through everything you've shared with us is not only instructive, it's inspiring. And it's just very, very cool. I
think just at the end of the last conference, and people have been sitting there, and you can go away and nothing happens. And so for me, it comes down to the hashtag accept the nudge. What will you do to make change or move things forward? Doesn't matter how small, but I don't have much time to just talk about it. The action for us all is really important, no matter how small it is.
Absolutely. So another question, we've been talking about change and change making for most of this conversation. I want to steer it back again to some of the underpinnings of kind of the tomorrow campaign and the big questions we're asking. So, you know, being a futurist, you know, having a deep background in education, being a change maker, when we think about all the changes young people are experiencing, we think about the tensions of trying to prepare people for the next generation of workforce and civic actors and all of the grand challenges that young people face. What do you view as being critically important in terms of the skills, knowledge, and dispositions that young people might need to thrive in this uncertain future that's unfolding around us?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and there's so many different things, but to me that creative, or that tension between creative thinking and critical thinking, both being really important. And I've always been strongly passionate about creative thinking, but it has to go with critical thinking, especially in these times of misinformation and noise, to understand all of the material that you're being bombarded with, and to have some sort of idea about what might be research proven, and what is more of a conspiracy theory or those sorts of things. I think that's a really important skill that our young people, and actually all of us, probably need. And so alongside that is the understanding viewpoints of others, and really being able to sit and listen to other people and understand what dialogue is, because if we continue to be in a world where the polarities are so strong, then that's not a good outcome for our planet. So I think that's a really critical thing. So that alongside with that goes the whole art of communication and care for not just self, but to be able to move out of your filter bubbles and explore other people's thoughts and take that into consideration. That's pretty hard. So that idea of futures literacy, building on the work of things like Teach the Future and Peter Bishop, really really good work. And I guess the last thing I'd say is that whole ability to be self-determining, or having the skills to take action when things go wrong, and just sort of referring to that, if you are only used to doing what you're told, and in an ordered way, and suddenly things go wrong, then you fall off the cliff into a state of chaos, and you don't have the skills or strategies to deal with it. So we have to train and support our young people to be able to think for themselves and take action.
Yeah, I resonate with everything that you just said, and you took thought bubbles and just voiced them for me, so thank you for that. And another thing that I've been noticing lately, and I haven't really found my preferred way of talking about it, is this very interesting generational shift that is unfolding. So Jason, you and I are in this in-between state, I think, in what I'm about to try and explain. Like, we're not youth anymore, but in the power dynamics, there are certain doorways that certain jobs, certain positions, it's just like, oh, you're in your 30s. I'm sorry, you can't have this yet, right? This doesn't belong to you yet. And so I'm noticing like two sides of this age spectrum where we're seeing this renegotiation of one's identity and the role that plays in power structures. We're seeing a renegotiation of an individual's place in a system, while at the same time we're seeing a big misinterpretation of systems thinking writ large, that a lot of people would just simply can't think in systems. And so it creates this deep interlocking tension between trying to create social change, critically engaged, while also being so narrowly funneled into one's own identity and like the sole importance of one's identity, and not connecting that back into the communities in which we all live in. There's a beautiful model. It's called the target model. It's individual, organization, community, and system, right? I don't know if that made any sense. I'm trying it out. I'm trying to learn how to talk about it.
No, it is very interesting. And we watch that transpire a lot of times when there's a leadership vacuum, right? And Knowledge Works went through the whole thing with our CEO search. We were blessed to, have this Chuck Ambrose come on as a CEO, but there is certain archetypes that are ingrained in us when we think about these things. And then when we look at sort of generational research, you and I are kind of in a sandwich generation because of that, right? And then the generation below us are going like, we're not even going to play this game anymore, right? We're going to do something different. The decision makers and folks that are holding power seem to not really be wielding that power in people's best interests. And to make the Christchurch connection, last time I was there, day one was the Extinction Rebellion march led by a high school student. Who just said we had enough, who was bearing slings and arrows from adults that just were mad for no reason.
I was thinking exactly that, Jason, because what you haven't said is that I'm not the sandwich generation. I'm one of those middle-aged older people. So my grandchildren are, or two of them are in the city, and I think I feel the responsibility because I don't have power. I have a small company. I work for myself, and I work with different industries and so on. But I don't have a power position. All I can do is influence and nudge, and some things work and don't. But I think coming back to the climate change demonstration, that was instigated by young people in the city, and one of those young women that was leading that, the way she was treated by some people in power, in particular men who would write messages to her that were completely unacceptable about what she was doing. And so I see my role and our role as being mentors and people that support them to say, you're doing an amazing job. Just put those to one side because the movement is forward, and help to not necessarily protect, but be there to mentor and support them. That's a critical role for us.
Absolutely. And I remember I had a brief moment at the conference where I was able to meet her, and I thanked her for all her hard work. And before that, you could tell there was a little tense. Like, she did not know what I was going to say. And you could tell had been going through just trauma after trauma while trying to make the world a better place for those same people that are inflicting the trauma on her.
I think that's the thing that she said at the conference was that she had been sort of quite quiet and reserved, and this important context of climate change had given her voice because it was her passion, and she was standing up there in front of large groups talking about this work because she'd found her passion. And I think that's a critically important part of the conversation.
And should be one of the highest ideals we hold for the future of learning, right? Every young person, every person should go through that wayfinding process and be able to connect with that passion that can truly change the world and feel supported by other generations in doing so.
And I think we can just say it and own it that every person, especially our young people, should feel a deep sense of urgency and emergency around stewarding the earth, right? Which we're sort of circling around but haven't just named and said yet. It's like we really need to start healing our relationship with our planet. We're in deep trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So with respect to time,
just taking us back to Indigenous people, Cheryl, I just wanted to also voice and bring them into that practice, which...
Yeah, and I think that is a really important part of going back to the voices of the first people in the land who are so connected. I mean, in New Zealand, the Whanganui River is actually given a person status. And so, yeah, we need to listen to the Indigenous people and to the land, because a pandemic is not actually the biggest issue. It's the urgent thing right now, but the other issue of our climate and stewarding our planet is a much bigger issue, really, really urgent, but not seen as being urgent because it's not right in the here and now that people can see.
This is a dress rehearsal for climate volatility, and we need to look at it that way. So I want to steer us more back towards vision and preferred futures. I want to end with my favorite question to ask of our guests, and that is, Cheryl, can you describe to us your vision or preferred future for learning?
My preferred vision for learning is where each learner, no matter the age, is connected to themselves, their place, and the planet, and that they're recognised for their diversity and acknowledged for that. And so each person will have a different journey, but collectively we also have a place that we need to head for the future of learning that is absolutely interwoven across the globe. So I think for me that's really important.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
All right.
There's a Maori phrase that says "he waka eke noa," which means we're all in this together. We're all in the same canoe, and so that's we're in critical times, and we need to be listening and working together.
Amen.
Amen. Absolutely.
Not to replicate, but to interconnect, right? And to find the strength in our difference.
Absolutely.
So
Cheryl,
go ahead, Ani.
No, you talk. Cheryl,
I know.
You always get so misty at the end. We're like, yeah. Yeah.
So I know Ani's been displaying the links, but just to give folks a reminder, can you walk us through how listeners might be able to get a hold of you, follow your work, connect with your other initiatives?
Yes, sure. So probably the best way to get a hold of me is through my company website, Think Beyond. Also, some of the other links have been shown up. So Think Beyond will take you to my blog and some of my thinking. Grow Waitaha is definitely worth checking out because it's got a whole lot of resources and examples of learning and what's happening in the city. And also Learning City Christchurch is will start to emerge with some of our activities going online in the next couple of weeks with our learning days. So please do keep in touch. Think Beyond is my typical space, but you can find me on social media in a whole lot of different spaces. I tend to poke my nose into all sorts of different places and really value the ongoing conversation.
I highly encourage everyone to follow Cheryl and to get into some good trouble and to engage in this conversation with you, alongside you, in fidelity with Christchurch. And I just want to express my deep gratitude for getting up so very, very early in your morning to spend time with us. I know that I would not be so eloquent at such a time of the day. So thank you for that. Jason, thank you as always for your beautiful knowledge and framing and humor and optimism. Please visit KnowledgeWorks to learn more. I hope that everyone will continue to hold space with us on Thursdays. Next week, we're joined by our founder, Greg Baer, and our #1 provocateur, Dr. Temple Lovelace of the Equity and Innovation Lab. You can find out more information at the Tomorrow website. And then a quick plug, since I'm in a new broadcasting space in my home, if you like my background and you're local, or even if you're not, go to the Boom Universe, Boom Concepts, and the magical artist, Mr. Daryl Kinsel. Buy that art, buy local art, support artists. And I think without further ado, I think that closes us out. Yeah? Okay. And thank you, audience. As always, you are loved and appreciated. And I'm going to close us out. Until next week, everybody.